The findings are blunt. Climate change is happening.
In the last election, few seemed to doubt that climate change was real.
Climate change poses a growing danger.
The risks of climate change are real.
But since then, a successful campaign has been waged to introduce doubt about the science.
This massive global conspiracy to make a certain case.
If you pay scientists enough money, they'll find what you want them to find.
They are cooking the data.
Scientific malpractice.
Do you think the science is being hyped on global warming?
Oh, very definitely, yes.
Correspondent John Hockenberry investigates.
The politics have gotten to the point where people just don't want to listen to science.
How did it happen? And who's behind it? Tonight, Climate of Doubt.
Chicago is now under full national security.
In fact, a no-fly zone is in effect.
Yes, we have some guests in town, and we down and enjoyed some of the festivities yesterday.
It was a big weekend in Chicago. Last spring, the president was in town, along with the leaders of NATO, to discuss threats to global security and nuclear proliferation. At a huge convention center, the eyes of the world were watching.
That demands global solutions. We came to Chicago.
But across town, in a small hotel ballroom, the fate of the world was also on the agenda.
Everything will be revealed at the second.
The eyes of the world might have missed this gathering.
Ready for your Al Gore snow job.
The message here is that man-made global climate change is a myth, a hoax. This conference is an annual pilgrimage for the key skeptics. We came here to understand how they have made their views a mainstream fact of American politics. They think of themselves as rebels up against the biggest players in science, government, and the media.
Wind and solar are based on public fear of global warming, and the mainstream media has pretty much given up its role as an independent reporter on these things and has become an advocate.
If you add up all of the resources of our side of the debate and all of the resources of the other side of the debate, this is a David versus Goliath story.
You're doing pretty well.
There are holdouts among the urban bicoastal elite, but I think we've won the debate with the American people in the heartland, the people who get their hands dirty, people who dig up stuff, grow stuff, and make stuff for a living, people who have a closer relationship to tangible reality, to stuff.
We need to keep banging away on the science.
Myron Ebell chairs a group called the Cooler Heads Coalition, one of a team of skilled policy advocates driving a remarkable turnaround that has already changed the U.S. political landscape.
Warming isn't, in fact, accelerating. In fact, there's been none for 15 years.
There's Christopher Monckton, a big draw at these meetings, who brings the skeptics to their feet every time. Republican Congressman James Sensenbrenner of Wisconsin, Vice Chairman of the House Science Committee.
Paul Krugman accused my colleagues and me of treason against the planet.
There's Chris Horner from the Competitive Enterprise Institute.
They sold it as economic salvation. This is our way out.
And James Taylor, Senior Fellow at the Heartland Institute, organizer of this gathering.
The debate, indeed, is over.
In the years prior to 2007, the 2008 elections, we actually heard from many folks that we should tone it down on global warming. We should not talk about the issue because the court of public opinion had already decided, and we were on the losing end. But we believe that if we present the case to the American people and it resonates, if they get it, then that's going to work its way up the political stepladder.
You've really changed the game on global warming.
Oh, I certainly hope so.
These political messengers rely on a small group of outspoken scientific contrarians, like climatologist Pat Michaels of the libertarian Cato Institute.
Every paragraph can be contended.
Willie Soon is an astrophysicist who studies the sun and stars.
You just found a mechanism to transport anything from the tropics to the Arctic.
They cannot fit northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere.
And Fred Singer, the veteran scientist at these proceedings, he's a retired physicist once responsible for government weather satellites, who tells people the climate needs no help from worried humans.
Adjustable parameters. Climate, to me, has become a non-issue. It's a phantom issue. There's nothing wrong with climate. It will change no matter what we do. It'll get colder, it'll get warmer. We just have to wait a little.
Singer says he's dedicated to explaining his theories about global warming.
What keeps you going? What's your motivation?
Basically, I like to see good science being done and protected. I think I'm fighting here for scientific truth. That's important to me.
Do you think the science is being hyped on global warming?
Oh, very definitely, yes.
Armed with that conviction, this team of skilled political messengers and contrarians has certainly changed the game. In just 4 years, the number of Americans who agree global warming is man-made has dropped to about half.
We should get these books, I think. I agree.
It's a message that is inspiring a new generation of skeptics.
I would like to really listen to these scientists who came and talk and have dedicated their lives to debunking this fallacy, so to speak.
Once upon a time, what these people call a fallacy had another name: the truth.
You've heard of off the charts. Within less than 50 years, it'll be here. The so-called skeptics...
In 2006, the film An Inconvenient Truth told a disturbing story and galvanized public awareness about the climate.
And now to a new report on global warming from a prestigious panel of scientists convened by the UN.
There's a new grim report out today from
This comprehensive report in 2007 took it to another level. Scientists from 30 nations concluded that global warming is unequivocal and that human activity is mostly the cause.
Countries went over it. It is the definitive report on global warming, and it's frightening.
I call upon the Peace Prize laureate for 2007, Al Gore, to...
The UN scientists and former Vice President Al Gore would share the Nobel Peace Prize. The cause had a consensus and a credible leader. The skeptics would take on both.
I think Al Gore was probably the best thing that could happen to global warming skeptics.
From my perspective, Al Gore was the perfect proponent and leader of the global warming alarmists because he's very politically divisive and controversial.
I think it was his tone and manner. He did at a certain point come across as holier than thou, and that's another thing about Americans. They're not really big on holier than thou.
Is a G-2B aircraft.
Personalizing the attacks was part of an approach that was immediately embraced and amplified by friendly media.
That is the former vice president getting off that plane into a town car. By the way, not a hybrid.
He equates a failure to recycle aluminum cans with the Holocaust.
He wants to be a superhero action figure, and...
Myra Nabel was acting on a broad strategy he helped create more than a decade ago. In this 1998 action plan, victory will be achieved, it said, when the public recognizes uncertainties in climate science. Today at the Washington, D.C. headquarters of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, a free market think tank, you can see Myra Nabel's philosophy proudly displayed on the walls.
They're all CEI authors. What we're fighting is the expansion of government, and there are many pretexts for expanding government.
Opposing government action on climate change to defend American freedom is a perfect fit.
We felt that if you concede the science is settled and that there's a consensus, you cannot, the moral high ground has been ceded to the alarmists.
So you had to go to work and break down this consensus.
Yes, and we did it because we believed that the consensus was phony. We believed that the so-called global warming consensus was not based on science, but was a political consensus, which included a number of scientists.
In 2009, agreement on global warming seemed part of the solid wave of enthusiasm that elected Barack Obama.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
With the changing of the guard in Washington, there was a bipartisan call to action, a sense of inevitability.
Speaker, the President of the United States.
An idea that for years had struggled for attention in Congress would get its moment of truth.
So I ask this Congress to send me legislation that places a market-based cap on carbon pollution.
The president backed the so-called cap-and-trade approach, a system of regulations and financial incentives to eventually reduce the emission of carbon into the atmosphere.
It seemed there was consensus on climate change.
There was an uneasy consensus, but the people who have always objected to change had not yet really engaged. And because of the consensus, and because there was a sense that there was going to be movement, that galvanized the action of the people who oppose it.
The American people hadn't focused on these issues until it actually came to a vote in Congress on a bill to implement these policies.
Today's hearing is on
the soft consensus for taking action ran into the bitter partisan divisions in Congress. Congressional hearings on cap and trade would become a stage where opposing views would get equal time.
Professor Schrage, you just heard what Dr. Michael said.
Pro-cap and trade lawmakers would call leading climate scientists and policymakers to make the argument for action now.
It's very clear from that estimate that in fact we're in for bigger trouble.
One of the things that we've already seen is many observed changes in the climate.
Global climate change is a serious threat to our national security.
The skeptics had their own witnesses. They testified that nothing was settled and that global warming might actually be good for the planet.
It's necessary.
Say that again. Carbon dioxide is what?
It's plant food.
It's plant food.
Yeah.
The testimony of the skeptics argued for a timeout. There was enough uncertainty, they said, to justify delay.
The right response to the non-problem of global warming, first slide please, is to have the courage to do nothing.
But the fear of catastrophic man-made global warming is mistaken.
This demonstration shows that the oft-repeated mantra in Washington, quote, "the science is settled," is not true at all.
If climate change is...
Skeptics had found a seat at the table, but the scientific consensus still had the momentum. When cap and trade came up for a vote in the House in 2009, it passed, with 8 Republicans on board.
The bill is passed.
The Waxman-Markey cap and trade bill passed the House very narrowly, 219 to 212. The members of the Senate, who were going to take it up in July, went home for the 4th of July recess. And they got an earful from their constituents.
You don't trust me?
Some of your other votes, such as cap and trade. We are not for more government.
The Tea Party saw a frightening expansion of government in the health care plan and the push for cap and trade.
Section 9, you're a traitor. You betrayed the nation, you betrayed the state.
The people of this country were really not concerned one way or the other on this issue until the economy started going south in 2008.
Was that an opportunity to push back on climate change, the recession?
It sure was.
I'm Tim Phillips, president of Americans for Prosperity. We're here in Billings, Montana.
What part did you play? We certainly did TV ads, radio ads, social media. We did rallies, events. We launched something we called Hot Air.
And we're sending the message to Senator Baucus and Senator Tester to vote no on this job-killing, tax-increasing cap and trade.
We got a hot air balloon, put a banner on the side of it that said cap and trade means higher taxes, lost jobs, less freedom. And we went all over the country doing events and stirring up grassroots anger and frustration, concern.
Cap and trade will slow the economy and cost American jobs.
Americans for Prosperity's well-financed campaign was an aggressive one. Ads that went after cap and trade policy.
America can't afford the cap and trade tax.
Our jobs
and said the science was a hoax.
Congress should stop wasting our money and focus on real problems.
Isn't it time Congress listened to the rest of us?
In the Tea Party's anti-tax, anti-big government message, you could now hear the skeptic mantra attacking climate science and cap and trade.
Trade and taxing America to death and our children.
At some Tea Party events, global warming skeptics were a big draw.
Gives me great pleasure to welcome Lord Monkton.
Introduced like a professional wrestler, Christopher Monckton is a former British journalist who admits he has no scientific qualifications.
Now we are met on a great battlefield of a new civil war.
But here, whipping up the crowd is his indisputable expertise.
That in American speak, you have a word for global warming. Can someone tell me what it is? Altogether, global warming is
Events like these fertilized the growing public doubt about climate change that was beginning to register with senators. With widespread anxiety over a shrinking economy, cap and trade was tabled in the Senate. The momentum towards action on global warming was vanishing.
I often say, if you ever wonder as an activist on our side, are you making a difference? Just look at cap and trade. January of '09, you had a president with 60 votes in the Senate, then Speaker Pelosi with a 50-plus seat majority, and cap and trade was at the top of their agenda. And in the end, they were beaten.
You've said if we win the science argument, I think it's game, set, and match. Why do you want to win the science argument?
If the science argument is won, I do think it would pull out the final underpinning of this legislative effort and this regulatory effort the left is undertaking.
Diminish the credibility of the scientific consensus, and action on climate change grinds to a halt. At a conference in Long Island, we witnessed how these skeptics build their message of doubt. We once again saw Fred Singer.
This is a conference mainly for medical doctors.
Delivering his message to a group of physicians who seemed eager to hear it.
Tell me that there hasn't been any perceptible trend. You essentially get no warming trend. In the last 10 years, there hasn't been a warming. We don't know why that is, but one doesn't see any warming in the observations. There's no trend.
No warming in the last 10 years? No long-term trend? Climate scientists would say that's playing games with the data.
You can, if you want, very carefully select the endpoints of your time series, the starting month and the ending month. And you can come up with, maybe you can come up with something that shows no warming.
In a sense, what Dessler is saying is that you can do this at home. On a complex chart, depending on the beginning points X and ending points Y, you can select a trend line that does indeed show temperature going down.
Could I pick 10 years of world history and show a climate cooling?
Oh, you could totally do that. In fact, you could take the entire climate history that we have in the instrumental record and you could find cooling trends every 10 years.
Cooling trends between 1958 and 1969. 1969 and 1978, 1978 and 1987, and so on. Scientists have a name for this. They call it going down the up escalator.
You pick the endpoints, and you could find any particular year as part of a cooling year. But actually, the whole thing has been moving up.
If you look at all of the data, it's quite clear that the warming is continuing.
So the 2000s was the warmest decade on record. The 1990s was the warmest decade before that, the 1980s before that, and most of us in the field of climate science expect, but we can't be sure, we expect that the 2010s will be warmer than the 2000s.
Against the backdrop of all the pressure from skeptic groups, Congress ordered a comprehensive review of climate change research by the National Academy of Sciences. The findings came back even stronger on human-caused climate change, and a subsequent study showed 97% of active climate scientists agreed.
What's settled here on climate change?
Virtually every place on Earth is warming up, and people who've tried to go back and scrub the data, like is there a mistake with the way they're making these measurements, they've all concluded that no, the people who are doing this work at the key places around the world are agreeing with each other.
What's the bottom line, though, on human-caused global warming? I raised my hand in a high school science class, and you're the teacher. Are humans causing the global warming we're seeing? What's your answer?
Mostly, yeah. Scientists are trying to shoot it down all the time, and years and years and years, nobody's been able to. So at some point, you have to say, maybe it's right.
Here's what the National Academy of Sciences report actually says.
Climate change is occurring and is largely caused by human activities and poses a significant risk for a broad range of human and natural systems. You say that's false.
Yes.
False.
False.
And if most of the climate scientists believe that statement, they're deluded?
Yes.
And you're seeing something they're not seeing?
Yes.
So it's 97% of them and 1% of you.
Oh, well, you can put it that way if you like, but I don't think that's the way it works. There's hundreds of us, hundreds, thousands of us. Look, 31,000 scientists and engineers signed a statement to the contrary to what you just read.
The Oregon petition?
Yes.
The 14-year-old petition is not exactly an exclusive club. A Bachelor of Science degree is all it takes to get you on the list. This document, skeptics claim, counters the scientific consensus on global warming.
Now, were they all scientists?
Yes. 1/3 of them have PhDs. Look, they're not specialists in climate
Well,
studies.
some were celebrities and, right?
Yeah.
It's a time-honored tactic by the skeptics, authentic-looking documents and reports that don't stand up to independent scrutiny. Singer also signed the Oregon petition, and this is not his first time going up against accepted science.
Was the science around chlorofluorocarbons hyped? The science around secondhand smoke hyped? The science around the ozone layer hyped, going back 10, 15, 20 years?
I'm happy to discuss all of these, since I've been deeply involved in these topics that you mentioned. Let me start with secondhand smoke.
Fred Singer is, I think, a professional contrarian. When I was in graduate school, I worked on stratospheric ozone depletion. And Fred would call me when I was in grad school and talk to me about how he didn't think humans were depleting ozone. And before that, he had real questions about whether humans were causing acid rain. And he didn't think that nuclear winter was sound science. And he really criticized the work that connected secondhand smoke to health impacts, and now he doesn't think global warming is an issue.
Al Gore making his case. So is global warming fact or fiction? Let's get to it.
But Fred Singer's case was bolstered when in November of 2009, the skeptics got a break that would put climate scientists on the defensive.
They falsified results. It's the fraud stupid to oversimplify it. That's
An
what we're
apparent
talking about.
scandal, and skeptics made the most of it.
Some stolen emails.
It erupted out of more than 1,000 hacked emails, which included scientists' internal conversations about global temperature
These
data.
people have already been revealed as not having any honor. Now they're being revealed as not having a
A
sense
few
of shame.
suspicious-seeming emails taken out of context would become ClimateGate. Even though 9 subsequent investigations would find no tampering with data, the impact of these emails would live on.
Even the lady in the supermarket has heard of the ClimateGate emails that purport to show that scientists have fabricated data or manipulated data, and that the whole idea of global warming has been proven to be a hoax. That is completely ridiculous. Continuing to use those emails as evidence that global warming is not real is inaccurate. By continuing to use those emails to slander the scientific reputation, not only of those individual scientists, but of a field as a whole, is irresponsible.
There's thousands of documents and internal emails coming out.
Katherine Hayhoe personally felt the effects of ClimateGate, a climate scientist at Texas Tech in the Panhandle. She's the lead author of a federal research report detailing the impact of global warming in the U.S.
The emails are real. Read the Associated Press.
She spends every Sunday in the church where her husband preaches.
You've heard this verse, maybe some of us, since we were this high.
I think the perception is often that climate scientists are godless tree-hugging liberals out to suck all the money out of the average person and use it all to fund all of this research.
How much of this is a part of your worldview?
My faith is integral to who I am. That's what defines me, not what I do on a day-to-day basis. And so when I study the planet, I feel as if I'm studying something that God created.
This summer at the Washington, D.C. Defending the Dream Summit for the group Americans for Prosperity, they have their own warning. Beware the leftist agenda that they believe underlies the climate change movement. Reducing emissions is cover for reducing freedom, they say. And they have the means to carry their free market message anywhere in the U.S.
This is our 6th annual Defending the American Dream Summit. We launched these in the fall of 2007. It's a great way to bring activists together from around the country to kind of bond to the organization. And also, it's good to have a bunch of free market conservatives in D.C. occasionally as well.
How does free market conservatism relate to climate change and the scientific argument over...
It doesn't to the scientific side. It very much so relates to the policies that the left pushes in the name of global warming. I mean, every once in a while, I'll make a statement about the science, but that's the tiny percentage of what we do and how we spend our money.
Oh, you win on the policy, you win on the science.
I think so. I do.
This is a community of skeptics. At the AFP rally, I ran into Myron Ebell, a supportive attendee and a speaker.
Why are you here?
Well, these are the grassroots that, support our side. This is essentially a more organized form of a Tea Party group, right? A better funded.
You've said, we've made great headway. What it means for candidates on the Republican side is if you buy into green energy or if you play footsie on this issue, you do so at your political peril.
You do, absolutely. And that's a big change, and it is important. Again, I remember 4 or 5 or even 3 years ago, John, a lot of Republicans, they would play games with this. They would say, okay, well, gosh, I think I need a green energy agenda, but I won't go all the way and support cap and trade. They did. They try to walk down the middle, and that's wrong. I think it's philosophically inconsistent, but it's also politically disadvantageous, and we've worked hard to make that so, by the way.
The left has had the edge as long as I can remember. They march out to the town square, whatever they're told to do, under the direction and coercion.
If 97% of scientists say it is mostly or significantly caused by human activity, what do you say to that?
They are entitled to their opinion, but they are going to have...
Do you think this will ever be settled scientifically if 97% consensus doesn't settle it for you?
Well, I think that it's up to the scientists and their supporters to convince the public that this is the right thing to do. And the supporters of that side of the argument in the Congress have been a huge flop.
I visited one of the key Democrats on this issue, Massachusetts Senator John Kerry. What had happened to all the momentum of 4 years ago?
Well, American politics is being completely defined by huge sums of money. We had really a very broad coalition of people who believed that we ought to move forward and do something. But as the campaign of fear built up, people began to retreat. They spent huge sums of money in a campaign of major disinformation that had an impact, had a profound impact. And it has now made many people in public life very gun-shy because they're afraid of having those amounts of money spent against them.
This is what they fear. What happened in 2010 to 6-term South Carolina Congressman Bob Inglis, a Republican who once thought he was a safe incumbent in his solidly red state.
You know, I'm a pretty conservative fella. I got a 93 American Conservative Union rating, 100% Christian Coalition, 100% National Right to Life, A with the NRA, 0 with the ADA, Americans for Democratic Action, a liberal group, and 23 by some mistake with the AFL-CIO. I demand a recount. I wanted a 0.
But Inglis does accept the scientific consensus on global warming and favors legislation to curb the effects of CO2 in the atmosphere. He faced a Tea Party rebellion in his primary.
I'm at a big tent gathering in Spartanburg County. Bunch of Republicans underneath a great big tent. Comes a question to me, yes or no, do you believe in human causation on climate change? Well, I had a bad habit of answering questions, so I said, yes. Boo, hiss comes the crowd. I was blasted out from underneath the tent. And so, I mean, there were a couple 300 people there. I mean, it was intense.
There we are. He was pounded in commercials and on talk radio.
It became a oft-repeated theme on talk radio, and that is a major source of information, of course, for Republican primary voters. They were hearing Inglis has left the reservation. He's over there somewhere with Al Gore. So how are things around here?
It's slow. How the economy's way off.
When you get the financial collapse going, that's what made it possible for some well-spent money to blow doubt into the science. Because, you know, the bankers failed us, the federal government's failing us, it's spending too much money, and these scientists who are funded by that federal government, they're probably in it too, and besides, they're godless liberals.
Inglis was defeated.
On the record, and our grandchildren or great-grandchildren are going to read.
This climate hearing in the lame duck Congress was Inglis's last.
Your child is sick. 98 doctors say treat him this way. 2 say no, this other is the way to go. I'll go with the 2. You're taking a big risk for those kids.
Thank you, Mr. Inglis.
It was a very key factor in 10 to 15 congressional districts in the 2010 election where strong supporters of climate change legislation ended up being defeated.
And there's nothing like a loss in an election to promote fear in the survivors. And that's exactly what happened in the United States Congress.
But for now, back at the Heartland Conference in Chicago, they feel they're winning. Their campaign of alternative scientific studies, opinion pieces, books and advertising, charts and presentations has been building for years. It's been money well spent. In the early days, much of it came from fossil fuel interests. Heartland presenter Willie Soon has received money from ExxonMobil. Chris Horner was formerly a registered lobbyist for oil, gas, and chemical companies.
2011.
Climatologist Pat Michaels of the Cato Institute has estimated 40% of his funding has come from fossil fuel interests.
Politics getting into science.
Exxon at one time was one of Heartland's most generous donors.
There were a lot of corporations, including oil companies, that objected to the Kyoto Accords in 1997, but most of them lobbied against the treaty on economic and fairness grounds. But Exxon did something that I think was fairly radical, which was that they chose to go after the science.
Our lives. And as for carbon dioxide, it isn't smog or smoke. It's what we breathe out and plants breathe in.
Borrowing tactics used on behalf of the tobacco industry, advocacy groups were enlisted to confuse the issue and shut down new federal regulations.
They call it pollution. We call it life.
A lot of these groups were run by economists, litigators, lawyers, and public policy specialists, people who specialized in getting a message out.
This group may not have been scientists, but they were really good at this sort of thing.
Well, some of them actually came out of campaigning on behalf of the tobacco industry. The explicit goal that was written down as part of this campaign was, let's create doubt, create a sense of a balanced debate, and make sure that these lines of skepticism and dissent become routinely a part of public discussion about climate science. And in fact, they succeeded at that.
That message has generated solid financial support for activist groups like Americans for Prosperity.
We have over 80,000 activists and donors across the country who fund AFP.
Some big donors?
Sure, you bet. We're glad to have big donors, absolutely.
Exxon?
I wish we had more corporate support. They don't tend to want to give to AFP very often. They think, frankly, that we're too out there on the free market front.
Koch brothers?
David Koch's the chairman of our AFP Foundation. We're glad to have his support. We don't disclose the level of contributions, but we're very proud to have their support.
Americans for Prosperity. We're blessed with just such a leader and our chairman, David Koch.
With money from their oil and gas holdings, David Koch and his brother Charles, along with other powerful family foundations, have quietly become the venture capitalists of this free market ideology.
The American dream of free enterprise, capitalism, is alive and well.
The major funders of the climate counter movement are ideologically driven foundations that are very much concerned about conservative values and worldviews.
Sociologist and Stanford fellow Robert Bruhl is studying the funding patterns of these groups. In fact, he's noticed a new benefactor, an entity called Donors Trust.
Who's Donors Trust?
Donors Trust, I think, is a C4 or a C3 that's given to us, absolutely.
We discovered that nearly half of Americans for Prosperity's support comes from Donors Trust.
And do you know who's behind it?
I think their board is publicly listed, I'm pretty sure.
Their directors are listed, but the donors aren't. From this office on an unassuming street in Alexandria, Virginia, according to public records, Donors Trust has become the #1 supporter of the groups that lead this movement.
We don't know a lot about Donors Trust. It is a black box with a few little clues coming out here and there, but no real image can be formed yet.
Donors Trust supports limited government and free enterprise, with a promise of anonymity, their website says, for donors who wish to safeguard their charitable intent.
So you see this shift from attributable funding to anonymous funding, which insulates the giver from any kind of political fallout from their giving. Is that people were organizing around, oh, evil ExxonMobil, oh, evil Koch brothers. Now it's Donors Trust, Donors Capital. Who are they? They get money, they give it out.
And that quiet money buys a platform for people like Christopher Monckton.
The scientists who are pushing this scare have a political agenda. It's a Marxist agenda. Of course, they wouldn't call themselves that. They call themselves environmentalists. Green is the new red, if you like.
Amidst all of the conspiratorial language and arguable claims by the skeptics, the idea of doing something about climate change has gotten lost.
The opposite happened. The prices collapsed.
This is not just an economic issue or an environmental concern. This is a national security crisis.
The national call to action from just 4 years ago has vanished.
Global warming demand our urgent attention.
I think the risks of climate change are real, and that you're seeing climate change. I think human activity is contributing to it.
We don't always see eye to eye, do we, Newt?
No, but we do agree our country must take action to address climate change.
Why would you ever do a commercial with Nancy Pelosi?
That was really stupid.
Do you believe global warming, man-made global warming is real?
I believe we don't know.
We don't know what's causing climate change.
There is no such thing as global warming.
The science is not settled on this.
Even for President Obama, action on climate change has been only a passing reference in a close election campaign.
Climate change won't make it stop. These things won't make for a brighter future.
That issue is not good for them right now. If you notice, the president doesn't talk much about it anymore.
I've noticed.
Have you? I mean, I've noticed that.
Does that make you feel good?
I think it says a lot about the effort, and I think it says a lot about Americans making a decision.
It's real interesting because we don't hear Barack Obama talking much about it.
I know.
We don't hear Mitt Romney talking much about it.
What if you're wrong?
What if anybody is wrong in this debate?
What if you're wrong?
Then I'll have to say I'm sorry. I wish we could speed up our efforts to reverse the policies that we have supported here at CEI.
Apologies or not, inaction has consequences.
High temperature records broken by the 100.
There is now no concerted national response to climate change.
Worst wildfire season in Texas.
And delay, the scientific community says, is what the planet simply can't afford.
Climate change is coming. It means drought, it means fire, it means suffering.
The entire climate is changing. It's affecting our energy, our water, our agriculture, and our health.
Drought has forced it to drink from its last reserves.
The amount of sea ice on the Arctic Ocean in 2012 was a record low.
Monstrous heat wave.
We'll all have to start getting used to this kind of thing.
The problem with climate change is that I think to many Americans it has seemed like a threat not to living generations but to future generations. And with that uncertainty and with the economic climate that we are in, Americans have been unwilling to impose a tax on themselves in order to protect generations as yet unborn. It may be that over the next 10 or 15 years, Americans will reconsider the ideas that were propounded by these campaigners, that there's a lot of doubt about all of the tenets of this science, and follow a different kind of intuition, which is that this is here with us now.